everyone! Today, join me as I summarize the highlights of American literature. So, what are you waiting for? Let's get started!
National beginnings. The first American literature was neither American nor really literature. It was not American because it was the work mainly of immigrants from England. It was not literature as we know it, in a form of poetry, essays, or fiction, but rather an interesting mixture of travel accounts and religious writings. During the last half of the 17th century, the Atlantic coast was settled both north and south. Colonies, still largely English, were established. Among the colonists could be found poets and essayists, but no novelists. The absence of novelists is quite understandable. The novel form had not even developed fully in England. The Puritan members of the colonies believed that fiction ought not to be read because it was, by definition, not true. The American poets who emerged in the 17th century adopted a style of established European poets to the subject matter confronted in a strange new environment. These are some of the American poets who contributed to the national beginnings of American literature. Anne Bradstreet. She was a poet. Born and educated in England, she admired and imitated several English poets. Her ability to capture the colonial experience in poetry established her place as one of America's most notable early writers. As the decades passed, new generation of American-born writers became important. One of it is Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin. He was a brilliant, industrious, and versatile man. His style of writing was clear and plain. He wrote gracefully as well as clearly, with a wit which often gave an edge to his words. Franklin helped to draft the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, and he negotiated the 1783 Treaty of Paris, ending the Revolutionary War. Washington Irving, named after George Washington, the first President of the United States. He provided a young nation with humorous, fictional accounts of the colonial past. Many of Irving's other writings take the reader to foreign lands, especially to Spain. But his Tales of Colonial America remain his most enduring contributions to American and world literature. Michael Wigglesworth. He achieved wide popularity among his contemporaries with his gloomy poem, entitled The Day of Doom. In the colonies south of Wigglesworth, New England, less gloomy poets and essayists wrote, but the southern colonies did not have the printing facilities found in New England, and no poet elsewhere achieved the popularity of Michael Wigglesworth. Romanticism and Reason. During the half-century, the United States went through some of the greatest changes in its history. In the middle of the 19th century, it was still mainly a country of farmers. Trade and manufacturing were growing more important with each decade, but it was not until the 1870s that a majority of Americans were making a living in non-farming occupation. In the middle of the century, Negro slavery was still a fact of American life. The nation was being split in two. The South defended slavery more and more vigorously. The North criticized it more and more earnestly. The bitter war waged between the North and South from 1861 to 1865 permanently altered the character of American life. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, for example, both denied that making money was as important as many Americans believed. On the other hand, both authors strongly affirmed the rights of the individual, and the dignity of the individual was then and is now a vital part of American creed. Another is Walt Whitman. His attitude towards sex was far more tolerant than that of the rest of his countrymen, but in his affirmation of democracy throughout his poems, he expressed values shared by most Americans. The American Short Story, 19th Century Developments. From the beginning of time, man has been interested in stories. For many thousands of years, stories were passed from generation to generation orally, either in words or in song. Usually, the stories were religious or national in character. There were myths, epics, fables, and parables. Perhaps it can be said that the short story is well suited to American lifestyle and character. It is brief. It can be read usually in a single sitting. It is concentrated. The characters are few in number and action is limited. The short story is the literary form to which the United States made early contributions. In fact, early in 19th century America, the short story reached a significant point in its development. 3 American writers were responsible for this development: Nathaniel Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe, and Washington Irving. Realism and reaction. Throughout the world, many people think of Americans as being outgoing, materialistic, and optimistic. Outgoing because they join clubs, take part in movements, talk with their neighbors across the hall or over the back fence. Materialistic because they are eager for new automobiles and bigger television sets. Optimistic because they believe that they have the power to do good things in a good world. There is some truth in this general impression, though less with the passing of each year, but American literature at its best has rarely been the product of such Americans. Modern voices in prose and poetry. Although important events often reflect themselves quickly in the literature of a country, the effect of World War I on American writing was delayed. The war promptly produced some mediocre prose and poetry, but distinguished work, mainly in form of novels, appeared only some years later. The best came from Ernest Hemingway. He had already written some very good short stories and one first-class novel, entitled The Sun Also Rises, but he did not publish a novel fully involved with the war till 1929. And lastly, modern American drama. Drama was the last of the literary types to which American writers have made a significant contribution. colonial Americans enjoyed plays, and even the Puritans attended dramas called moral dialogues. That summarizes the highlights of American literature. Thank you for watching.